On October 7, 1571, Ottoman Grand Admiral Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha led a fleet of roughly 230 galleys and galleots, backed by a navy that hadn't lost a major fleet action in living memory, into the Gulf of Patras, off the western coast of Greece, to finish off a coalition of Christian powers that barely trusted each other, let alone had any business beating him. Ali Pasha expected what Ottoman admirals had come to expect for the better part of a century: an easy encirclement followed by a rout. What he sailed into instead was 6 ugly, slow, overloaded merchant hulls that nobody in either navy had ever used in a full fleet battle before. And by the time his own flagship burned, they'd already broken his formation before a single Ottoman soldier crossed a Christian deck. So how did 6 clumsy gunships nobody respected manage to unravel the largest and most experienced navy in the Mediterranean in a single afternoon? To understand why this mattered, you need to understand exactly how bad things looked before the fleets ever met. In 1570, the Ottoman Empire took Cyprus from Venice. Not cleanly, brutally. The Venetian commander at Famagusta, Marco Antonio Bragadin, surrendered under a guarantee of safe passage. The Ottomans broke it. They flayed him alive and paraded his skin around the island as a warning. That's the temperature this war was running at before anyone fired a shot at Lepanto. Pope Pius V spent years trying to drag together a coalition to answer it. What he ended up with was called the Holy League, and calling it united is generous. Venice and Genoa hated each other more than they feared the Ottomans. They were commercial rivals who assumed sabotage as a baseline. Spain didn't fully trust Venice's commitment to the fight, and the man given supreme command of this entire fractured alliance, Juan de Austria, illegitimate half-brother of King Philip II of Spain, was 24 years old, with no experience commanding anything close to 200 warships in open water. Against that stood the Ottoman Navy, undefeated at sea for decades. Roughly 230 galleys and galleots, crewed by tens of thousands of men, a large share of the oarsmen enslaved Christians taken in raids across the Mediterranean. This was not a fair fight on paper. It wasn't supposed to be. The Holy League needed something the Ottomans hadn't planned for. What they had was 6 ships nobody in either fleet respected. The galleass wasn't born as a weapon. It was born as an argument nobody wanted to have. Venetian shipwrights, working out of the arsenal in Venice, had been experimenting for years with a hybrid. Take a big, heavy merchant round ship hull, the kind normally built for hauling cargo, and pack it with heavy artillery instead of goods. The problem was obvious the moment you looked at one. Galley warfare in the 16th century was built around speed and maneuverability. Narrow hulls, banks of oars, ships that could turn on a coin and ram or board an enemy before he knew what hit him. A galleass was none of that. It was slow, it was clumsy. It needed to be towed into position by regular galleys because its own oar power couldn't reliably move a hull that heavy fast enough to matter. Traditional naval officers on both sides of the Mediterranean looked at these things and, frankly, laughed. A warship you have to drag into battle behind a real ship isn't a warship. It's cargo with cannons bolted on. For years, that's exactly the reputation the galleass carried. A Venetian curiosity, useful maybe for coastal defense, useless in a real fleet engagement where speed decided everything. Nobody had ever used galleasses in a full-scale fleet battle before Lepanto. Not once. Which means what happened in the Gulf of Patras wasn't a proven tactic being executed with confidence. It was 6 untested ships about to get their first real trial in the largest naval engagement fought in 500 years. Here's the insight somebody in the Holy League's command actually understood, and it's the whole reason this story works. A galleass didn't need to be fast, it needed to be first. Conventional naval thinking obsessed over maneuverability because galley warfare was, at its core, a ramming and boarding contest. You needed to outturn and outposition your enemy before contact. But nobody had built a ship this heavily gunned before, and heavy guns don't care about maneuverability if you can get them in front of the enemy's formation before the fighting starts. The Venetians and the Holy League command grasped something the Ottomans hadn't accounted for. You don't need a fast ship to win a fight that hasn't started yet. You need a slow, ugly ship with more cannon than anything else on the water, sitting exactly where the enemy has to sail through to reach you. That's not a maneuverability weapon. That's an ambush weapon disguised as a merchant hull. Now here's how they actually put it to use, because this is where the planning gets genuinely granular. The Holy League's fleet formed up in a crescent across the mouth of the Gulf, roughly 208 galleys divided into a center, a left wing under the Venetian commander Agostino Barbarigo, and a right wing under the Genoese admiral Giovanni Andrea Doria, with Juan de Austria commanding the center from his flagship, the Real, and a reserve squadron held back under the veteran commander Alvaro de Bazan. The 6 galleasses were pulled out of that formation entirely and placed roughly a mile in front of the main line, 2 positioned ahead of the left wing, 2 ahead of the center, 2 ahead of the right, towed into position by oared galleys before being anchored or allowed to drift into their firing positions. The idea was simple on paper and brutal in practice. The Ottoman fleet, sailing in on its usual crescent formation, expecting to encircle a numerically weaker Christian line, would have to sail directly past or through these 6 gun platforms before it ever reached the ships it actually wanted to fight. Each galleass carried heavy artillery mounted along its broadsides and bow, dramatically more firepower per ship than anything in a standard galley, which typically carried only a handful of forward-facing guns designed for a single ramming pass. A galley fought like a knife. A galleass fought like a fortress wall that happens to float. And a fortress wall doesn't need to chase you. It just needs you to walk past it. The plan depended entirely on timing. Fire too early and the Ottomans adjust course around the galleasses with room to spare, since the Gulf was wide enough for a wide detour before they closed the distance. Fire too late, and the galleasses are simply overrun by galleys 3 and 4 times faster, contributing nothing but decoration to the coalition's line. The gap the Holy League needed was narrow, close enough that redirection would cost the Ottoman formation precious cohesion, but early enough that the galleasses could get several full broadsides off before anyone reached grappling range. On the other side of that gap stood a man who had absolutely no reason to expect any of this would work. Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha had risen through Ottoman service to govern Egypt before taking command of the fleet. A career administrator turned admiral, more comfortable directing men on land than reading a battle line at sea. That mattered because his instincts ran toward direct, aggressive confrontation, the kind of tactics that worked when you commanded soldiers on solid ground and could trust sheer numbers to overwhelm a smaller force through sustained pressure. He'd spent his career on the winning side of that equation. The Ottoman Navy hadn't lost a major fleet engagement in decades. Why would this be different? He had every reason for that confidence. His fleet had the numbers. His crews had the experience. And nothing in Ottoman naval history had ever prepared him to treat 6 slow merchant hulls as a serious threat worth planning around. If you'd told Ali Pasha that morning that those 6 ships were about to break his formation before his galleys ever reached the Christian line, he'd have had no frame of reference for taking the warning seriously. Nobody did. That's precisely what made it work. The 2 fleets sighted each other on the morning of October 7th. As the Ottoman formation began its advance toward the Christian crescent, expecting the usual wide encirclement, the 6 galleasses opened fire at range, long before Ottoman galleys had any expectation of taking cannon damage from ships that slow. The effect was immediate, and it was not subtle. Heavy shot tore into the leading edge of the Ottoman formation, sinking at least a couple of galleys outright before contact, and forcing the rest of the advancing line to break cohesion. Some peeling wide to avoid the fire, others pressing forward into gaps that hadn't existed in the original plan. An encirclement built on disciplined spacing does not survive that kind of disruption. The Ottoman center, still under Ali Pasha's direct command, lost the clean formation it needed to swing around the Christian line, and instead of encircling a smaller force, found itself funneled into something closer to a straight, grinding, ship-to-ship collision. That collision became almost immediately unrecognizable as a naval battle at all. 200-plus galleys locked oars in a space too narrow to maneuver, and men started fighting hand-to-hand across jammed decks, Spanish tercio infantry against Ottoman janissaries, close enough to see each other's faces. Ali Pasha's flagship, the Sultana, drove straight into Juan de Austria's Real. For roughly an hour, soldiers fought across the locked decks of the two flagships while the battle raged around them. Then, a musket ball found Ali Pasha's head. He went down. A Spanish soldier finished the job, cut off his head, and ran it up a pike above the deck of his own captured flagship, visible within minutes to every Ottoman sailor still fighting nearby. The sight of their commander's head on a Christian pike, alongside the loss of a sacred Ottoman banner carrying the name of Allah embroidered nearly 29,000 times in gold thread, did what 6 galleasses alone couldn't have finished. Morale across the Ottoman center didn't waver, it collapsed. And as ships fell, thousands of the Christian slaves chained to the Ottoman oars broke loose and armed themselves with whatever weapons they could grab, turning on the men who'd enslaved them from inside the enemy's own hulls. Not every Ottoman commander went down with the center. On the Ottoman left, a commander named Uluç Ali Reis recognized what was happening early, disengaged his squadron in good order, and even captured the flagship of the Knights of Malta on his way out, the one senior Ottoman officer to leave the battle with his reputation intact. Within about a year, he'd be running the entire reconstruction of the Ottoman Navy. Remember that name? This story isn't done with him. By the time the fighting stopped, the numbers were the kind historians still double-check before printing. Roughly 25 to 30,000 Ottoman sailors killed or wounded, with something close to 3,000 taken prisoner. Somewhere around 117 galleys and 20 galleots captured outright. Another 50 or 60 sunk, run aground, or destroyed, leaving, by some tallies, as few as 30 Ottoman vessels able to withdraw from the Gulf. On the Christian side, roughly 7,500 to 8,000 dead, a disproportionate number of them knights and noblemen, and something like 15 to 22,000 wounded, among them an ordinary infantry soldier named Miguel de Cervantes, sick with fever, who'd refused orders to stay below deck and took 3 bullets for the privilege, one of which permanently crippled his left hand. He'd later write that he'd lost the use of that hand for the glory of the right one, a line about writing, because that ruined hand belonged to the man who went on to write Don Quixote. And in the water, roughly 12 to 15,000 Christian slaves walked free from the wrecks of the fleet that had chained them there. 6 ships nobody trusted had helped break a fleet that hadn't lost a major engagement in living memory. If that sounds too lopsided to be real, you're not alone. This is one of the few battles in naval history where the raw casualty gap gets double-checked by every historian who touches it, and it holds up every time. Here's the comparison worth sitting with. Nearly 4 centuries later, in June of 1942, American forces at Midway, badly outnumbered on paper against an Imperial Japanese Navy that hadn't lost a major fleet engagement in years, used a decisive intelligence and timing advantage, broken codes, and precisely coordinated dive bomber strikes to sink 4 Japanese fleet carriers in a single day. Japan kept the ability to build ships after Midway. What it lost, like the Ottomans after Lepanto, was the trained, irreplaceable crews and the initiative that never fully came back. Different centuries, different oceans, same shape entirely. A force with a narrow technical or tactical edge, breaking something that months of shipbuilding can't repair. Because that's the other half of this story, and it's the part most retellings skip. Lepanto broke a myth. It didn't break an empire. Within a year, under Uluç Ali Reis, the Ottomans had rebuilt a fleet of roughly 250 ships, including some of the largest warships the Mediterranean had ever seen. Cyprus stayed Ottoman for the next 3 centuries. The Ottoman Grand Vizier, informed of the disaster, reportedly told the Venetian ambassador that taking Cyprus had cut off an arm that would never grow back, while losing the fleet at Lepanto had only shaved a beard that would grow in thicker than before. He wasn't bluffing, he was right. What Lepanto actually changed was smaller and, in its way, more permanent. It proved that raw numbers and unbroken tradition could be undone in a single afternoon by 6 ships nobody respected, positioned in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. Galley warfare itself didn't survive much longer after this. Within a generation, sail-powered ships with broadside artillery were making the oar-driven galley obsolete across Europe. And the galleass's entire premise, heavy guns over raw maneuverability, was the design principle that won that argument. Walk into the Museu Marítim in Barcelona today, and you can stand next to a full-scale replica of the Real, built inside the very Gothic shipyard where the original flagship was constructed in 1568. 60 meters of red and gold, silent, indoors, nowhere near open water. And if you went looking for the battle itself, you'd find even less. In 2021, a team of marine geophysicists returned to the Gulf of Patras with modern sonar and submersibles, retracing a 1971 survey that had flagged possible wreck sites. They found nothing. No hulls, no cannon. Just natural seafloor formations that had briefly looked, decades earlier, like they might be ships. The largest naval battle fought in 500 years left almost no confirmed wreckage anyone has ever located. What it left instead was a lesson that's held up better than the ships did. The side with the biggest reputation isn't beaten by matching its strength. It's beaten by the thing it never thought to plan around. If you're the kind of person who actually wants to know why history's biggest reversals happened, not just that they happened, we cover forgotten weapons and tactical decisions exactly like this one every week. Might be worth sticking around for the next one.